Okay, so today we're going to really zero in on something that's, a big deal for all of us here in Jamaica.
Yeah.
Housing.
Yeah.
We all need a place to live.
For sure.
And you've probably heard, all the talk about the housing situation. Maybe you're even feeling it yourself.
Right.
So we're going to dive deep today into this topic by exploring a really insightful piece from the Jamaica Gleaner by Christopher Burgess.
This is going to be good.
Yeah, his commentary is really insightful. And, our mission today is pretty straightforward. We
Yeah.
want to pull out the most important points from this piece so you can really understand what are the challenges, what are we up against, and what are some of the potential ways forward when it comes to housing in Jamaica?
Yeah, that's the key.
Yes.
What can we do
What can we do?
about this?
Exactly.
And it's a complex issue. So,
It is.
you know what Burgess does really well in his commentary is he allows you to see how, different players fit into this picture.
Yeah.
The NHT and the private banks, how do they all kind of come together or not come together
Right.
to address this?
Exactly. And, I think one of the things that really jumps out at you when you read Burgess's piece is he starts by talking about the historical role of the NHT.
Right.
And it really makes you think about, how far we've come and also where we are now.
Exactly.
So, think about it back in 1976 when the NHT was created.
Mm-hmm.
The idea was really, pretty simple: create affordable housing options for Jamaicans.
Yeah.
And you can't argue with the impact they've had.
Right.
Over 240,000 Jamaicans have benefited from the NHT.
That's huge.
Either through mortgages or through, housing units that they've built.
Yeah.
So, they've really made a difference in people's lives.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that really makes you scratch your head.
Yeah.
Even though more people are contributing to the NHT now than ever before,
Right.
fewer houses are actually being built.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It's what's going on here?
Yeah.
It's a real puzzle.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you look at the NHT Act itself,
Right.
it gives the trust two main things to do.
Okay.
One is adding to and improving the existing supply of housing.
So just, making sure there are more houses out there
Exactly.
and that they're good quality.
Yep. And the second thing is to enhance the usefulness of its funds
Okay.
by promoting greater efficiency in the housing sector.
So really making the most of the money that they have.
Exactly. Using it wisely.
Yeah.
And one thing that Burgess reminds us is that, in the past, the NHT wasn't just a lender.
Right.
They were actually involved in building houses themselves.
Yeah, they were on the ground.
Yeah. They were developers.
Yeah.
And they're great examples of that, like Greater Portmore back in the 90s.
What a massive project.
And then you have the inner city housing projects
Yes.
around the mid-2000s.
Uh-huh.
So they were really, getting their hands dirty.
Yeah, they weren't just sitting in an office somewhere.
No, they were out there making things happen.
Right, making those houses a reality.
Yeah, but it seems like things have shifted quite a bit since then.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, the numbers that Burgess lays out really tell the story.
Okay.
He points out that between 2000 and 2006, the NHT was completing over 4,000 housing units every year.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. But then you look at 2023,
Uh-huh.
and it's less than 1,600.
That's a big drop.
It's a huge drop. And, these figures are coming straight from the NHT's annual reports. So
Right, it's not just speculation.
it's not just someone's opinion. These are the actual numbers.
Hard data.
And even the number of people benefiting from the NHT each year has gone down. It's really quite striking.
So fewer houses being built and fewer people getting access.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder what's driving this change.
It does. And, the NHT itself has pointed to a few reasons for this decline.
Okay, what are they saying?
Well, first of all, there's the rising cost of construction.
Right, everything's more expensive these days.
Yeah. Exactly. Materials, labor, it all adds up.
Ah.
And then there's the issue of land.
Okay.
Suitable land for building is becoming more and more scarce,
Yeah, finding the right spot to build is not easy.
especially when you're trying to keep things affordable.
Right.
And then you have what they call rigid procurement rules.
Okay, explain that to me.
Well, imagine you're trying to build a house,
Mm-hmm.
and for every single nail you buy, you have to go through this complicated approval process.
Oh, wow. So it's super bureaucratic.
Yeah, it can be a real headache, and it slows everything down.
Right, red tape everywhere.
Exactly. And on top of all that, there are often long delays in getting project approvals.
So even if you have the land and the materials, you still have to wait forever to get the green light.
It can be really frustrating, and it adds to the costs.
So it sounds like it's this combination of factors, rising costs, land scarcity, all of this red tape.
Yeah, it's a real bottleneck.
Yeah. And when you think about it from the perspective of just the average person who needs a home in Jamaica, it really paints a picture of the scale of this challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Experts estimate that Jamaica needs about 15,000 new housing units every single year.
Yeah, that's a lot of houses.
It is a lot of houses. And when you look at the NHT's current rate of building, it seems pretty unlikely that they can meet that demand on their own.
Yeah, not without some major changes.
Exactly. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how homes are financed.
Okay.
Because that's another crucial piece of this puzzle.
Absolutely.
It directly affects your ability to actually get a mortgage.
For sure.
And the NHT plays a huge role here.
It does.
They provide a whopping 60% of all the mortgages in Jamaica.
That's a dominant position.
It is. And over the last decade, they've been averaging about 8,000 loans per year.
Wow.
And in 2023 alone, they dispersed $47 billion.
That's a massive amount of money.
It really shows you the scale of their operation. But then you have the private sector, your traditional banks, building societies.
Right.
And they're not nearly as involved in providing mortgages.
Yeah, their contribution is much lower.
Yeah, it's around $24 billion, according to Burgess.
Okay.
And he points to a few reasons for this.
Like what?
Well, for one, the interest rates that private banks offer are higher.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's more expensive to get a mortgage from a bank. And then there's also competition from the Bank of Jamaica.
Okay. How does that work?
Well, the BOJ, they need funds too.
Sure.
So they're also competing for those same dollars.
Right, so it's like a bidding war.
In a way, yeah. And then there's this thing called asset taxation.
Asset taxation, yeah, that's a key factor.
I'm not sure I fully understand that one.
Well, basically, it's a tax that banks have to pay on their assets.
Oh, okay, so it's like a cost of doing business for them.
Exactly, and it makes lending less attractive.
Especially for things like mortgages where the returns might not be as high.
Right, they might see other investments as more profitable.
And we also have to talk about the government withdrawals from the NHT.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It's been happening since 2013.
Right.
The government has been taking out $11.4 billion every year.
Every year. Wow.
And that's money that could be going towards helping people get mortgages.
Yeah, it's like taking money out of one pocket to put it in another.
Exactly, and it really makes you wonder, how much more the NHT could be doing.
If they had that money.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a significant chunk of their funds.
It is. And, looking ahead, if we're serious about meeting that demand for 15,000 new housing units every year,
right,
Burgess suggests that we need to double the total mortgage disbursements.
Double, wow.
Yeah, so we're talking about reaching somewhere between $60 and $100 billion per year.
That's a huge jump.
It is, but it highlights the scale of the need.
Yeah, for sure.
And to get there, we'd need to see two things happen.
Okay, what are those?
First, we need to stop those government withdrawals from the NHT.
Right, put that money back into housing.
Exactly. And second, we need a much bigger contribution from the private sector.
Yeah, they need to step up their game.
But that's easier said than done.
It's not just about telling them to lend more money.
Right. There are other factors at play.
Yeah, and one of the biggest is the shrinking value of the loans that the NHT is providing.
Okay, explain that to me.
Well, even if you manage to get an NHT mortgage, the amount of house you can actually buy with it has decreased over time.
Oh, I see, because of inflation.
Exactly. Inflation has eroded the purchasing power of those loans.
Right, so even though the loan amounts might seem big on paper,
yeah,
they don't go as far as they used to.
And Burgess provides some really clear examples of this.
Okay, like what?
Well, he points out that in 2006, the NHT gave out 10,000 mortgages with an average value of $2.75 million.
Okay.
Fast forward to 2010, just 4 years later, and they could only issue 6,000 loans.
Even though the average loan size had increased to $5 million?
Right. So even with bigger loans, they were helping fewer people.
Wow, that's really striking.
It is, and it shows you how quickly prices were rising.
Yeah.
And the problem is that the maximum loan amount the NHT offers hasn't kept pace with those rising costs.
Right, so it's like they're falling behind.
Exactly. Think about this back in 2004.
Okay.
The NHT loan ceiling was $2.5 million. And that had the same buying power as about $11.3 million today.
Wow, so you could buy a lot more house back then.
You could get a starter home in Catherine Estate with that.
With $2.5 million.
Yeah, but now even with the current ceiling of $7.5 million,
right,
it often takes two people applying together just to afford something similar.
So even with a higher ceiling, it's still not enough.
Yeah, for many people, it's just not enough.
And that's a real problem for affordability.
Absolutely. And Burgess suggests a couple of things that could help.
Okay, I'm listening.
He thinks the NHT should focus more on building smaller starter homes.
Some more affordable options.
Exactly. Not everyone needs a big, fancy house.
Right, especially when you're just starting out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he also suggests providing serviced lots.
Okay, what are those?
Well, it's basically a piece of land that's ready to build on.
Oh, I see. So it already has things like water and electricity connection.
Exactly. And that can make it much easier and cheaper for people to build their own homes.
So it's like giving them a head start.
Yeah. And he thinks that would be a more efficient use of the NHT's resources.
So it's not just about building houses. It's about creating opportunities for people to build for themselves.
Exactly.
I like that idea.
And he also argues for increasing the loan ceiling to at least $10 million.
So giving people more borrowing power.
Yeah, to better reflect the reality of current property prices.
Right, because sticking with that 7.5 million just doesn't cut it anymore.
Exactly. It's not enough.
So, we've talked about the NHT, but what about the private sector?
Right. What role are they playing in all of this?
Because they're not doing nothing.
No, they're not. But they could definitely be doing more.
Yeah, and Burgess points out that the entire financial sector in Jamaica...
So that includes the NHT and the private banks.
Yeah, everyone.
Okay.
They do support between 2,000 and 4,000 new housing units each year.
That's not insignificant.
It's not nothing, but it's still a far cry from that 15,000 we need.
Yeah, and they're providing between $40 and $70 billion in mortgage loans.
Okay, so there is money flowing into housing.
There is. But the problem is that the private banks aren't as active as they could be.
Right, and we've already touched on some of the reasons.
Yeah, like the competition from the BOJ and the asset taxes.
Let's be honest here.
Yeah.
Private banks are businesses.
Right. They're not charities.
They're looking to make a profit.
Exactly.
And sometimes they can find investments that give them a better return than mortgages.
Especially when it comes to affordable housing.
Right, because those mortgages tend to have lower interest rates.
Exactly. So it's not always as profitable for them.
And that brings us to another major hurdle, the interest rates themselves.
Right. There's a huge difference between what the NHT offers and what you see from the private banks.
Yeah, the NHT's rates are incredibly low.
Yeah, they average under 3%.
Which is amazing when you compare it to the 9% to 11% that you typically see from private banks.
That's a massive gap.
It is, and it makes it really hard for private lenders to compete.
Especially when it comes to financing affordable housing.
So it's like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, they want to be profitable, but they also want to help people get homes.
Right. It's a tough balancing act.
It is, but there are some positive signs.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, Burgess highlights the recent growth in mortgage portfolios of some major private sector players.
Like who?
Like Scotia Group VMBS and JMBS.
Okay, so they are lending more.
They are, which suggests that there's potential for them to do even more.
Right. Maybe they're starting to see the opportunity in the housing market.
Yeah, and if we could just remove some of those barriers.
Like the government withdrawals from the NHT.
Exactly.
Burgess thinks that if those stopped, the NHT could potentially be dispersing between $70 and $90 billion in loans.
Wow, that would be a game changer.
It would make a huge difference.
But it all comes down to political will.
Right. Will the government actually make those changes?
And that's a big question.
It is. And there's one more really important point that Burgess brings up.
Okay, let's hear.
It's this thing called asset tax.
Yeah.
And he says it's a major obstacle.
It is.
Preventing the private sector from getting more involved in mortgage lending.
Yeah, especially for housing.
He even quotes Jerome Smalling,
the CEO of JMAB.
Yeah, and Smalling explains how this asset tax, combined with the competition from the BOJ, is really impacting their decisions about investing in the housing sector.
Because they have to weigh their options carefully.
Exactly.
They're a business after all.
And it's important to understand that this asset tax isn't a tax on their profits.
Right, it's a tax on their entire asset base.
And it's been in place since 2014.
So it's a constant burden for them.
Yeah, it's like this extra cost that they always have to factor in.
And it makes investing in housing less appealing.
Because it eats into their potential returns.
Right, they might be better off putting their money elsewhere.
So even though the overall financial sector in Jamaica has grown a lot...
their loan portfolios have increased significantly.
Yeah, from $100 billion in 2004 to an estimated $500 billion in 2024.
That's a huge jump.
It is. It shows that there's money out there.
But it's not all going towards housing.
Right, and that's the problem.
And it begs the question... how can we incentivize the private sector
to invest more in housing.
Exactly, especially in affordable housing.
Because that's where the need is greatest.
Absolutely. And Burgess's conclusion is pretty clear.
What does he say?
He says that Jamaica's financial sector does have the capacity to meet the demand for housing finance.
Okay, so the money is there.
Money's there, but it's being held back by what he calls retrograde policy decisions.
Like the asset tax and the NHT withdrawals.
Exactly. Those are two major obstacles.
And he really emphasizes the negative impact of those government withdrawals from the NHT.
That $11.4 billion every year.
That could be making a real difference in people's lives.
It is being used to support housing.
Yeah, and then you have the issue of those high interest rates from the private banks.
Which makes it hard for them to compete with the NHT.
And it limits their ability to participate in affordable housing finance.
So we're kind of stuck in this cycle.
Where the NHT is struggling and the private sector isn't doing enough.
And it all comes back to government policy.
Exactly. So Burgess's main takeaway is this.
Okay.
If we want to see real progress on housing in Jamaica, we need to end those NHT withdrawals.
Put that money back where it belongs.
And we need to incentivize the private sector to get more involved.
Make it more attractive for them to invest in housing.
And until we do that,
yeah,
the housing crisis is only going to get worse.
That's the reality.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's clear that the NHT, while it's been a crucial institution,
yeah, it's helped a lot of people.
It is facing some serious challenges.
In terms of its capacity to build new homes.
And the shrinking value of its loans.
Right. Those loans aren't going as far as they used to.
And we've seen that the private sector has the potential to play a bigger role.
But they're facing their own set of hurdles.
Like the asset tax and the competition from the BOJ.
Exactly.
And Burgess really drives home the point that government policy is at the heart of all of this.
It's the key to unlocking the potential of the financial sector.
To really tackle this housing crisis.
That's right.
So this leaves us with a big question for you to think about.
Okay, what is it?
Considering everything we've discussed today, the challenges facing the NHT, the position and potential of the private banks,
right,
and the current policy landscape,
yeah,
what single policy change do you think would have the most significant positive impact on Jamaica's housing market?
It's a tough one.
It is. It's a complex issue.
Yeah, there's no easy answer.
And maybe even more challenging to consider, what do you think would be the biggest obstacle in actually making that change happen?
Because it's one thing to have a good idea.
Yeah.
It's another thing to actually implement it.
Exactly. So we really encourage you to think about this.
Yeah.
Consider the different perspectives we've explored today and the complexities of this issue. And see if you can come up with your own answer to that question.
I'm curious to know what people think.
Me too. I think it's a really important conversation to have.
Absolutely.
So until next time, keep thinking about housing in Jamaica.
And keep those good ideas coming.
We need all the help we can get.
For sure.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Bye.